Libraries Live. I'm Jason Griffey. I'm going to be the host of this particular episode where we are going to talk about libraries and the future in very rough terms. I've got a really stellar panel with me here today. I'm going to let them introduce themselves, and the format for the day is going to be questions and answers. I've got three people that are going to be talking about questions that I've prepared ahead of time. We're going to be riffing off of those questions and trying to just get some interesting conversations going about libraries over the next 5, 10, and even longer years. Just try to have some interesting conversations. We will take questions from the audience, both on the American Libraries Live website. There is a chat that is embedded at live.americanlibrarieslive.org. There's a chat on the right-hand side of the page that you can enter questions in, and we will keep a little eye on that. We will also try to keep an eye on Twitter. The hashtag for American Libraries Live is ALLive. So if you use the hashtag ALLive, we should see those, and we'll try to get those in as we go through our little hangout for the next hour. Before I get to the first question, though, I need to introduce the panel. I'm going to let them say a few words about themselves, tell you where they are and what they are up to. We'll start. I was going to say to my left, but there is no space or time in the internet, so I'm going to start with Rebecca Smith Aldrich. Rebecca, can you introduce yourself for us, please?
Sure. My name is Rebecca Smith Aldrich. I'm the coordinator for library sustainability for the Mid-Hudson Library System. We're located in the Hudson Valley of Public Libraries, and my job is essentially to help them have the capacity to endure. So I spend a lot of my time helping my libraries win their budget votes, build new buildings, do leadership coaching, and trustee education.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thanks for joining us. I appreciate you spending an hour with us this afternoon. Next up is Ben Bizzle. Ben, tell us a little about yourself.
Thanks, Jason. My name is Ben Bizzle. I'm the Director of Technology at the Craighead County Jonesboro Public Library in Jonesboro, Arkansas. I'm also the author of the recently released Start a Revolution, Stop Acting Like a Library, and I'm just happy to be here.
As his screen said, he is not John Kratzka. So let's not confuse those two people. And last on the panel, but absolutely not least, we have Andromeda Yelton. Andromeda.
Thanks, Jason. So I'm Andromeda. I am a self-employed library technologist in Greater Boston. I write contract Django web apps or whatever you've got. I write and speak on library technology issues. I have something coming out actually from TechSource next month on code that librarians actually write and how you can too. And I teach people how to code.
Awesome. For those of you who are interested, I didn't introduce myself. I'm Jason Griffey. I am the founder of Evenly Distributed LLC, which is a consulting group for libraries. We do technology planning, building planning, makerspace planning. I write and speak on libraries and technology, and up until very recently, up until July of last year, I was the head of IT at the library at the University of Tennessee, Chattanooga. So my background is an academic librarian. We've got an independent librarian and 2 public librarians. So hopefully we're going to cover a handful of perspectives as far as the types of libraries that we cover. One of the things that was brought to our attention yesterday on Twitter that we wanted to mention briefly was that I and TechSource and the rest of the panelists are aware that we're not bringing a lot of other voices other than maybe a geographical and a type of library set of voices to the mix. So one of the things that TechSource is going to be doing is bringing another round, at least one and hopefully other rounds of this sort of webinar about the future of libraries with a diversity of voices. Andromeda, do you want to update us on what's going on with that?
Yeah, I was talking with Dan and a prospective panel moderator yesterday, and I think they have yet to talk to each other about logistical details. So I don't have a date, and I don't want to spill too many beans. But I am super excited about the prospective moderator, and I think everyone else will be too. And yeah, she'll make it awesome.
Awesome. I am super excited about that as well. I'll be looking forward to seeing and listening to that particular episode of American Libraries Live. So look forward to that, everybody who is watching. For now, we're going to dive into some of the questions that I prepared for the panel, and hopefully have some arguments about what what the right or wrong answers are to these. I'm going to start with the one that I thought was the most interesting, or one of the most interesting to me. So I'm going to throw it out to the panel. What topic do people talk about when they talk about the future of libraries that you think is just completely wrong? What do you think is a topic that comes up over and over that you just think is a waste of space and breath? And I'm going to hit Ben with that one first. What do you think, Ben?
Thanks, Jason. Let me go ahead and make folks upset early on.
Absolutely. We're trying.
No, actually, I've got a really vague answer for this, because I don't know that there's a specific thing that I could mention and say, everybody that's doing this is just, completely off base with it. First off, I don't think that I have a perspective that would allow me to do that. But I think maybe my snarky answer would be that the topic that keeps coming up about the future of libraries is the future of libraries.
Way to be meta.
It's one of those situations where we talk in almost cliche or lingo sorts of terms, and we kind of lose sight of what we're trying to accomplish when we have these conversations. And future of libraries kind of becomes kind of what was pointed out yesterday. It's this sort of topic that gets like you say, meta. It's a big, gray, nebulous sort of a thing. The challenge that I think we face as libraries right now is that when we start looking at that future of libraries sort of approach to things, we kind of just cut ourselves off from where we are presently, and we stop looking at what we're doing, and we start looking at what we need to be doing down the road. And we have a lot of opportunity to just be present. I hate the term library futurist. I see that thing thrown around and tagged to people a whole lot. And I don't even know what the hell that is. I like to say when I do talks that I'm not a library futurist. I'm a library nowist. Because I look at what we need to do. There's so much stuff that we need to be doing presently that we're not currently doing to maintain our relevance and stuff, that when we go to looking at those future things, we sell ourselves short on work that we should be focusing on, just to kind of bring us up to be relevant entities in today's society. More specifically, I think that I would say that it's the approach we often take when we're trying to figure out what path we need to go with the future of libraries is there's a real habit of just kind of slinging everything against the wall and seeing what sticks. And I don't think that that's a good approach to investing our time and energy and resources, because we do have very limited time, energy, and resource. So I think that if we were to take a step back from the idea of let's just try every single new thing that comes out and maybe better assess what our planning would be for the individual things that we do attempt to take on, we'd be a little bit more productive in setting our own futures.
All right. There are about a dozen things that you said that I'm going to disagree with, but I'm not going to disagree just yet. I'm going to let our other panelists jump in first. Either Andromeda or Rebecca want to jump on that one?
I'll jump on. I think I can tailgate there on what Ben the Bizzle was saying. I spend a lot of time talking to community members. I spend obviously a lot of my time with libraries, but more time talking to legislators and people in the community who may or may not use the library, and who kind of sidle up to me after a focus group and ask me in whispered tones, do you think there'll still be libraries around? So I have to answer that question a lot. And what they're always thinking about is, well, books are on the decline. Of course we wouldn't need library buildings, and we won't need librarians that much. And I always try to refocus that conversation from actually books to the issue of content, which means access and empowerment. Are we actually going to be able to provide access in the future for libraries? So I get tired of having the conversation of books versus no books, but I do think it's important that we get really good at talking about how our true mission is access and empowerment through that access, and how buildings are actually more important than ever. Our digital spaces are incredibly important, but what I'm hearing from local communities on the ground, grassroots, they want places to come together as communities and meet their neighbors and learn from each other. So I think we've got to always reframe or refocus our talking point to the issue of access. Are we still providing access to information, to knowledge? And that knowledge has to come in all its forms, both the print and non-print and the human. And I think we can't lose sight of the fact that we are about humans and making sure we've got a good place to live in the future. And libraries are an essential component to that. So when we go down the rabbit hole of the books versus not books thing, I really try to pull myself out of that and help our libraries don't get too sucked into that either, because it has to be people-centric as we move forward, not stuff-centric. How we design our buildings, how we talk about what we do, it has to be about the people. And I think that's where we fall down a lot when we talk about the future of libraries. It's really about the people who work in our libraries, but more importantly, the people that we serve. And like Ben said, are we making decisions based on what people really need, or are we guessing what people really need? And that's where there's some work to be done there, and talking to our communities a little bit more about what's important.
Awesome. That is, yeah, I will agree with the entire bit about books versus no books. That is such a cliched, overdone sort of future of libraries discussion, honestly. Andromeda, any thoughts on this particular one? What is wrong about talking about the future of libraries?
All right, as long as you're asking me to tell people they're wrong.
Yep.
I tend to find that discussions or predictions of what technology will bring us in the future sound very different when these predictions are made by people who actually write code or implement it or develop hardware, and by people who don't. And in particular, I find that the predictions of what technology will bring us tend to sound much more utopian than I believe in as someone who actually wrestles with things like, why doesn't this encoding work, and why is this data so messy? And for me, the thing where I find myself most disbelieving of claims about what technology will bring us is anything having to do with the semantic web. I think these things tend to presume a level of artificial intelligence that is decades out, and a level of data cleanliness that is not plausible. So I mostly don't believe any of those.
All right. So we have a doubter in the semantic web. All the metadata people can now direct all of your comments to Andromeda.
Yep.
All right. Awesome. So I'm gonna ask a couple of follow-ups. So Ben, you said that you think we spend too much time necessarily kind of talking about the future and not enough kind of focusing on what we need to do right now. I don't disagree with that, but if we don't do some predictive, looking at the edges of things, how do we know which direction to steer ourselves?
Well, I don't want it to sound like I'm saying that we don't need to be forward-thinking. I just don't want the forward-thinking to get into the way of things that we stumbled at doing that we should have already done. Just as a real simple example, if we're going to talk about technologies, look at your average library website and understand the barrier to entry that website creates for people trying to expose themselves to library services. We create barriers to entry that are not necessary. The tool sets are out there today for us to have quality websites that are responsive on any device. But when we don't have those tools available to patrons, they judge us based on the quality of our site, just like they would the cleanliness of our buildings. But they also are they're not able to find the things that we have to have available to them. But at the same time, when we go to talk about web design, well, that's not sexy. It's not out there on the bleeding edge. It's, web design. We've already got a website. So it's a thing you hear a lot. But at the same time, is it serving the need that it needs to serve today? And are we taking those today steps to make sure that we are serving our patrons as good as we possibly can? That's kind of the point that I was making. It's not that we don't need to be forward thinking. It's just we've got a lot of cleanup that we need to be doing that we've overlooked over time.
Oh yeah, okay. I don't disagree with any of that. Then I thought I was gonna get to punch you a little bit, but no. When I do presentations about, I do a lot of presentations about technology and the future, right? Like that really is kind of my gig in libraries. Honestly, is this bleeding edge looking at technology. And when I go and give presentations to libraries about this stuff, one of the things that I say over and over and over is that I don't believe, and it isn't true, that all libraries need to be cutting edge, bleeding into the technological future. I usually use the Rogers Adoption Innovation Curve example, and if you're not familiar with that, just Google Rogers Adoption Innovation Curve, where you have a small percentage of the community of a community are innovators, and a small percentage of them are laggards on the other end of the adoption curve. And in the middle, there's a bell curve of people who are early adopters and early majority and then late majority adopters of technology. And the suggestion that I always give to libraries is that all libraries don't need to be innovators, but you should know where your community is, and you should try to be just a little bit ahead of your community. If your community are a bunch of late majority technology adopters or a bunch of late majority adopters of whatever, insert X here, whatever that thing is, then you only need to be one step ahead of them. You don't need to be on the cutting edge, right? So it's about knowing your community and knowing how to respond to the community. That's been my message to libraries kind of over and over again about this particular topic.
Jason, can I jump in there on what you were saying? When I'm, like I said, I do a lot of community focus groups, and a lot of times what I hear from the public is that the library is one of the most tech-savvy places in the community. So for all of the internal library profession beating ourselves up, we could be so much better at technology, we're always behind the curve, we're not necessarily perceived like that in many of the small communities that we serve here in upstate New York. We're often the place where people found their way to unbidden. We did not invite them in to help them with their e-reader they got for Christmas 5 years ago, right? They said, hey, I need help with this, and they naturally chose to come to the library for that kind of help. So I think that one step ahead is a really, really smart way to describe what needs to be going on. That if we are understanding how people are encountering technology and how we can best use our skills to support them in that, we're actually, like I said, being seen as pretty tech-savvy individuals in our local or smaller communities, at least. Yeah,
I definitely think that's true. I had a follow-up for Rebecca. You and this is a little tangential, but I wanted to touch onto it, and that is that you kept using the word access, right? You kept saying, that we are a place for access to information, not necessarily books and that sort of thing. There is a big discussion over the last decade or so in libraries about access and ownership, right? We have leased ourselves into access roles that we cannot monetarily keep up with. And this is a very kind of slight digression, but how do you see that kind of moving into the future? Do you see us, as far as providing access to things, are we going to continue just leasing ourselves into debt?
That's a super interesting question. I'll admit that I'm not on the collection development side of things, but I'm on the funding side of things. My libraries have to find the money to have the stuff that people want when they want it. So I think there's the issue of access to what you want when you want it, which really speaks a lot to the fiction consumption that we see going on in libraries. But my bigger concern in some ways is about the nonfiction and kind of reference side of things. And if we're leasing that type of information and not retaining control over access to educational information that is necessary, we're really crippling America in a big way. I think the literature side of things, the fiction side of things, libraries are so good at working together in a collaborative way. And yes, I'm a system person. I have 66 libraries, and all of my libraries share their collections with each other, and that's what we're so good at. I think we've got a hive mind here that can help with the access issue for the leasing of popular materials, but we've still got those really important librarians out there there who are curating and deciding what are those things we can't retain, we can't lose control of our access to. So it's a complete moving target right now, where I don't think that market has settled enough for us to say we're doing it right or not. We're just trying to keep up with the now, like Ben was saying before, for the time being. And I know there's smarter people than me working on the access issue for long term. At least I really, really hope there are.
All right, I know that Andromeda has some thoughts on this too. I'm sorry, I'm gonna call her out because access and ownership is something I know she thinks about.
Yeah, I mean, I wrote a thing for a library journal a couple years ago that sort of encapsulates my thoughts, but it's basically that the combination of the technologies available and the contracts available right now for electronic content, for leasing content, tend to make us choose between fundamental values, notably access and privacy. And you have a print book, you don't necessarily have that choice. People read print books and it's not recorded who read them or how they read them or anything like that. You know, you may have to wait a couple weeks to get it from the holds list, but aside from that, you can access it. Ebooks really make it possible to track users and to have that data outside of the library in ways that, you know, may be correct answers for some libraries, but that I think we have to really consciously consider as to where are our values and is this the trade-off we want to be making about them?
Yeah, yeah. The issues of the privacy of reading and information-seeking habits is obviously a huge deal. We can talk about that in a little bit if we want. About, again, moving into the future, there are a number of active projects out there that are trying to help libraries better understand this. So, Ben, I may have cut you off by calling Andromeda out. Do you have a thought on the access ownership thing moving into the future?
Well, I have a broad opinion about the contracts that libraries find themselves bent over a barrel and having to sign in order to provide access. But I think that I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that we're nonprofit organizations that are often led by people that aren't necessarily as business savvy as the vendors who we wind up doing business with, and we don't have the business leverage to negotiate as good a contracts as we could, so we're taking advantage of in that regard. I'm trying to be as pleasant as possible in what I say but the reality of it is that there are a lot of vendor offerings out there that are worthwhile for our patrons, but the way that we have to engage contractually is a poor expenditure of the funds that we've been entrusted with. So it winds up becoming a balancing act between providing a certain access to something, but then being good stewards of the public fund in the process of signing a contract that is not in the best interest of being responsible stewards. So you know, the onus is not necessarily exclusively on libraries beyond the fact that we can say no, and sometimes I think maybe we'd be better served not providing access to something that is not in the best financial interest of whoever it is that we're representing in the process of trying to provide that access. Is that circular enough for you?
No, it calls back to the I mean, there are certainly, again, my background is academic, and there are academic libraries that have gone to the point where they said, you know, we simply aren't going to buy this, and yeah, this is going to suck, and yes, it is going to impact our, you know, the students and the faculty, but unless we have the money for it, we just simply can't do it, and you need to show some. There's a pain point there, right? Like we literally can't keep signing away all of the money we have because it just runs out, and then our budgets aren't growing, and we have to figure out how to illustrate those pain points to people. And one of the ways in an academic library is to make your faculty mad, right? It's one of the ways to illustrate it pretty quickly. All right, so. One of the questions I had, I'm going to give us plenty of time to talk about this one because I think you guys probably had some really interesting ideas. So one of the questions that I sent was, imagine that you had $10 million and you could spend it in any way you wanted to make libraries better. What would you spend the money on if your success was going to be measured 25 years from now? How could you spend that level of money so that it had an ongoing effect on the future of libraries? What would be the best use of $10 million right now? Not that I have $10 million to give anybody, but if I did, I want to know what you'd do with it. Who wants to jump on that one first? Andromeda, go.
Yeah, I've spent a lot of time thinking about this one the last couple days because it sounds like a lot of money, and then you start parceling it out over, you know, salaries and 25 years and what have you, and you very quickly run out. And the other thing that struck me is if you had been asking us this question 25 years ago in 1990, no one would have said the internet, so we all would have been wrong. So I'm not going to presume to guess what we're going to need to have done 25 years from now, because I don't think anyone has that level of predictive ability. Which means to me what we have to do is spend that money on building capacity so that whatever it is, we're ready when it gets here. And $10 million is enough that you can endow a foundation, and on the investment income from that, you can hire a couple of staff, hire someone who's really good at fundraising, publicity, event planning, and every year put on as many of you can things like ACRL's Immersion or OCLC's Developer House. You know, bring people together because we have a lot of knowledge in the field. Bring people together and let them teach each other in a really intensive, immersive way that builds these cohorts and connections, and leave the topics fluid enough that they can respond to whatever people turn out to really need. And get someone who's good at marketing so it's really glamorous so people actually really want to do it.
Okay, so ongoing educational efforts coupled with really, really good marketing.
And let people learn from each other.
Is that the answer?
Build capacity by working with each other intensively.
Okay. Okay. So that's 10 million, and you think 25 years from now you could measure that? You'd have a set of people where you could go, those people, those came from my cohorts. That would be good.
I think I'll have to, you know, watch what happens with the Developer House people and talk to the immersion people and so on and get a sense of it, because there's a limited number of people you can reach for that, which is part of why publicity really matters and geographic dispersal really matters. But I think it's the most I can do with 10 million in 25 years.
You're probably right. All right, Ben, what do you got?
My answer, surprisingly, is actually fairly similar to what Andromeda's was. My snarky reply was I'd take the money and invest it and make that decision 20 years from now with what I had in 20 years.
It's a great answer.
Mainly because of what Andromeda said about, you know, being able to predict that far out. I mean, the running joke at my library for a long time was, you know, Ben, when are you going to get me your 3-year plan, your technology plan? And I'm like, I can't predict what I'm going to be doing 3 years from now. I can give you maybe a 6-month plan or tell you what we've got planned for this year, but that's about it. Yeah, so 25 years out and what you'd spend $10 million on today. If you held my feet to the fire, again, I think I'm kind of dovetailing off what Andromeda had said. Except the route that I would take is more in line with what I was just discussing. $10 million, I think I would look to set up some sort of educational program that's business-oriented for library leaders. I think that we find ourselves where we have oftentimes some really exceptional librarians in charge of libraries who don't necessarily have any business experience or business education. And I think that if we somehow developed a curriculum for library leaders to think more like small businesses when they're assessing their contracts and evaluating their contracts, when they're making decisions and look at things like ROI, you know, your return on your investment for the sorts of things we were just talking about, where you talk about that pain threshold and so forth. If we train librarians how to think more like small businesses, because I think that we've grown ourselves into a position with the way the world works now that we have to start considering our competitive advantages relative to the things that people are leaving libraries and seeking elsewhere. And so I think, you know, a business mindset and investment in growing that business mindset would be a beneficial use that would have some results in 25 years from now. I don't know how far 10 million is going to go with that, but it's a start.
It is a start. It is a start. All right. So Rebecca, what do you think? What would you do with $10 million?
I'm so impressed with Andromeda and Ben. They're so well thought out. I was going to say a Super Bowl commercial.
I admit my first thought was buy some senators, but I don't think you can get many for that price. So.
No, I was really thinking about how I spend so much of my time, I call it my advocacy army. I'm always trying to build more advocates for libraries, both inside of libraries and in the field, just regular people who believe in what we do and really understand the power of what we do. So I was thinking, I'm really super excited about those libraries that are embracing the whole idea of hacking the library, the hacker culture. And that's the kind of flexibility and mindset we need for the future, because like Ben said, we don't know what's coming. None of us can predict that. Like Andromeda said, we wouldn't have predicted the internet 25 years ago. Or maybe we would have, I don't know. But I think if we have the mindset, the right mindset to be receptive to what comes next, to know how to roll with the punches and actually crack the code of what's going on in our community and with technology and the funding situation in our individual communities, we're going to be more elastic and therefore resilient and have sustainable libraries. So I think when we think about that $10 million, how do we make it last forever? It's impossible. It's not that much money in today's world. So one of my ideas was to actually create kind of like an innovator's prize. We could have like 10 $1 million prizes to incentivize people in our field and outside of our field to hack the library of the future, to really build on those libraries that are teaching kids how to code, and let's like nefariously prep those kids so that when they're adults, they're hacking our OPACs, they're hacking our ILSs, they're making our buildings better places to harness green technology. Let's just build this army of people who understand that we're important, and in the future we're going to need their help, and give them the skills they need to make it better. I think that's the best we can do today with what we know. Or a Super Bowl commercial, whatever.
Whichever. I like that a lot of you, all of you really, were considering that kind of effectively some type of core education, right? Whether it's educate the librarians, educate the patrons. There's always this teaching methodology that it comes back to. I guess, obviously, if you're trying to affect the future, education is a big deal. Much like Andromeda's comment about buying a senator, when I was writing the question, the very first thing I thought was, I wonder how much copyright reform $10 million will buy. Like that was literally the first thing that went through my head, was like, I wonder how much of an impact we could actually have if we just threw buckets of money at copyright, because that is such a massive problem, and it's going to be even more complicated and harder to deal with moving forward into the future. That's the one that at $10 million I don't think that moves the scale even a little bit. I don't think that makes a difference at all, which is kind of sad in its own way. Okay, so up next, I'm going to take a question from Twitter, actually, that just came in, mostly because it's very close to a question that I had already prepared. What is a successful implementation, a project or a program that you've seen at a library that you think set it up for the future? What do you think is a program or a project or something that you've seen in a library in the last year, 2 years, something like that, that you think is actually something that will be around for a long time and that will impact the future of libraries? I'll call a name.
Well, I'll go ahead and jump in.
Okay, do it, Ben.
I don't. I try to talk about things that I know about, and really the only thing I know about is the way that we do things in Jonesboro, Arkansas. I don't deny that at all. I look at the approach that we take to things. Of course, I'm open to what other people are doing, but as far as having personal knowledge, we have made a really big push over the course of the last couple of years with outreach programming, and we feel like there's a real value given the shift that people have of not wanting to take the time to come to a building, the building with books in it kind of model for libraries and everything, to take the library out into the community. So we actually, our director retired last year. When our new director came in, rather than having an assistant director position, we actually filled that position with an outreach coordinator whose specific responsibility was to create those external engagements for the library. I think that's probably for us, and because it works at a few different levels, that's probably been the one thing that I've seen that's been most significant over the last couple of years to help us with our community. And there's a few different reasons. The more exposure you have out in your community by going out and doing those sorts of things, even for the people who don't participate, word gets around. So there's this goodwill sort of philosophy of being out and immersed in your community on a regular basis, so that even for the people who do not necessarily use the library, they don't want to see anything happen negatively to their library, because they're always seeing what the library is doing for the community. So I think I probably have to say that our shift toward things outside of the building and our outreach efforts with the community is the most significant thing I've seen in the last couple of years.
Cool.
Can I piggyback on? I'm going to riff off of there. I think that focusing outside of ourselves is super important. I spend a lot of time looking at libraries that are helping to build sustainable communities. If you take a look at the West Vancouver Memorial Library in Canada, the Hop Hog Library on Long Island here in New York, libraries that are really thinking about how does what the library do, what choices the library make, contribute to a more sustainable world. So when we're looking at libraries that are not only building a green building, but operating that help build sustainable skill sets like seed libraries or making your own food or repairing your own stuff. Libraries that are really helping to hold people up and say you can be self-sufficient in the coming world that's a very uncertain place. These are things that I think are going to serve libraries and therefore communities for a really long time. We talk a lot about resiliency here in the Northeast after Superstorm Sandy and Hurricane Irene. We saw communities really devastated by those severe weather events, and libraries that are getting themselves at the table to have the conversations about what does it look like to be more resilient in the face of these unexpected weather events are demonstrating the highest degree of care for the people that they serve, going beyond the idea of just a repository of knowledge and information, but actively participating in the survival of their communities is, I think, something that's going to serve us for a long time to come. We're getting more people interested in us who never thought about how libraries play a role in their own community. So we're seeing new streams of funding opening up, we're seeing new partnership opportunities, and libraries are really playing a part in part of what Ben was saying, that whole idea of placemaking, for us to actually create a sense of community, not just in our own buildings, but throughout the community that we serve and at large. So I think that attention to the issue of sustainability from the environmental standpoint and going beyond sustainability to being a resilient library and community and one that focuses on bringing new life to the community that they serve. I think I'm really excited about those libraries to see where they are in 10 years, because I think people are highly invested in those types of libraries because we're investing in the people we serve.
Absolutely.
Yeah, what she said.
What she said. It was very eloquent in her description. It sounds like she may have said that a couple of times. So I'm going to follow up real quickly before we get Andromeda's answer to that question, because I'm curious, Rebecca. So the idea that the library is building, is building these close attachments with the community is awesome. But like, give me one example of a program. What are they doing? Like, what is the actual effort that is coming out to get that done?
So we're seeing libraries do programs along the lines of seed libraries, so that you have ownership over your food source, or libraries that do story time at the farmers market to actually help parents participate in their community. Libraries that are partnering with the Appalachian Trail to bring the visibility of family experiences to the fore, so that we're not just about lending stuff to people, but we're actually facilitating experience. One of my libraries, the Phoenicia Library, which is a kick-ass library, they actually had a fire burn down. The community rallied together to bring this library back. They now have a whole ukulele club, and really, I know,
awesome.
Right? They're like,
that's the best.
They're playing the ukulele together. I was there for the grand opening. There was a ukulele concert. They marched in the parade together. But this whole idea of providing experiences that bring people together has actually been demonstrated to save lives in the face of adversity. There's a super interesting study done by the Resiliency Design Institute, and they've shown, we had an actual informal poll at the Greenbuild conference with 500 architects and engineers, and they ranked the #1 resilient feature to focus on is building social connections, because it's been scientifically proven to save lives. So it's not about putting your HVAC in the basement to avoid flooding. It's about building those connections. So anytime we're facilitating the experience of being part of a community, I think that's building a more resilient community, and libraries are perfectly positioned to make that happen.
That's fantastic examples. Yeah, fantastic examples. I always, again, when I do to do talks, especially to public libraries, always describe them as the heart of their community, right? That's that's kind of what you're describing. They're the part through which everything circulates. I like that kind of idea for a library. So, all right. So Andromeda, you haven't touched this one yet.
I haven't touched the question.
So
and I
no,
have another example of what Rebecca was talking about, actually, that kept springing to mind, which was after, I think, Hurricane Sandy. The Princeton Public Library had electricity, and most of Princeton did not. And they did a really good job getting the word out on social media that, hey, come here and you can charge all your devices that all have 1 hour of battery remaining. And they were packed. Anyway, in terms of who's done a really good job implementing a program, the thing that keeps coming to mind is the 4th floor in the Chattanooga Public Library. And the 3 things I really like about that are, 1, that they do such a good job empowering the staff there to be creative. 2, that it's explicitly a prototype space, so it's okay for things to fail, and they can try new things, and if they don't work, it's fine, and if they do work, they can scale it up to the library as a whole. So it gives them a chance to explore what the service models ought to be and what's actually successful, and not just throw everything at the wall and see what sticks, because if it doesn't stick, you stop doing it. And then the 3rd thing is, like what Ben and Rebecca were both saying, it's really fueled by community partnerships, by inviting the community into the library and by going outside of the library and finding ways to work with the local Linux users group or the local design community or all of these amazing skills that people have in their community in a way that can be part of the library and benefit more people. So yeah, all of those things kind of combined to really work for me as an implementation model.
Yeah, when Ben was mentioning earlier about the business and trying to get the business, kind of thinking in and everything, a few of the things that he said made me think of the 4th floor model in Chattanooga. I will say that when it comes to doing that outreach to the community, don't want to give him too big a head, but Nate Hill, the assistant director at the Chattanooga Public Library, is hands down the best librarian I've ever seen at that. He is fantastic at doing that outreach and pulling in those community partners and things. And I think, a lot of libraries could learn from their model, from what they've been able to do over the last couple of years. So, all right. So let's go with one more. This one actually also from Twitter. This came in from Twitter. I apologize for not crediting the person who asked. I lost you in the Twitter stream, but one of our tweeters asked, how do we train librarians to be future ready? What would you change about grad programs? I thought that was an interesting question. So what would you change about the training that librarians get as a part of the introduction to the profession?
I'd bring those business classes that I was going to spend $10 billion on into that.
Yeah.
Into the MLS program.
Yeah. Have the MLS program hook up with the business program on the campus, right? Like get those.
Well, I just think that it's critical. I've gotten pushback before when I talk about you don't run a library like a small business, and we're talking about the back end, not the front end, not the service aspect of librarianship. But I think that it's a disservice to librarians in general to assume that they have a certain skill set that's managerial in nature without having the training through their educational process to attain those skills. And you need to be able to work with budgets and human resources issues and policies and negotiating contracts and the sorts of things that come from a business education that I think that is sorely missed. When people get an MLS, there's no reason for you to have an expectation that someone who has gone through an MLS program is necessarily going to be a good leader when it comes to the sorts of decisions that you have to make in a leadership role of any organization. So, for me personally, I think that there's a serious need for business skills to be part of the MLS program.
Okay. Rebecca, what do you think?
I think that in addition to that, the business skill, I hardly approve of that idea, Ben. I also think leadership at every level is critical to convey immediately. They always joke that they say there's two types of librarians, right? Front desk people and catalogers. But really, we all need to be frontline leaders in our profession and our communities. And so I think that's something important to engender in our studies. I was going to say it's been a while since I was in library school, but I was lucky enough to go talk to the public libraries graduate class at the University of Albany 2 weeks ago. And what I saw there was exciting to me. They were actually super interested in what's going on in the field. And that's something I would like to see a little more of, is to see younger students getting in the field as fast as possible, so they get a true connection to how what they're learning is having an impact on people's lives. Because if we can instill the passion that is necessary to sustain your career in libraries, the sooner they see how what they do translates into helping people, I think the more invested that our future librarians will be, and the more excited they'll be about what new and different changes or technology could mean in terms of service to community. So I think, again, the sooner they understand that they're going to be leaders no matter what job or track they take is really important, and that practical experience, hands-on experience where they see change happen is really important, and also to get that flavor of what real life is like sooner is always a good thing.
Andromeda?
I think this is such a fraught question, because if you ask 10 people what should be more of in library school, you will get 20 different answers, and you cannot teach 20 courses over the course of library school to one person. And the specific things that people find themselves needing more of can vary quite significantly by career path. But many of us really don't know when we're in library school where our careers will go. I mean, it seems more common than not that people don't end up where they expected to. And so it's very hard to look forward and say, you know, what should I take now in school, because you'll probably be wrong about what you should have taken. I do think fieldwork is very important. But I think, considering all this, I wish we had a career path that made it easier to do just like the bare minimum of library school first and then come back later and fill in the bits you discovered that you needed.
Sure.
I think that as a whole, infusing, and some people already do a great job of this, but in infusing all of the classes with a sense of, this is the beginning, this is not the end. You're going to need to keep developing these skills throughout your career, and here's how. Yeah. And also, this, like futurism, as we were mentioning at the beginning of the panel, this is one of the questions where I hear very different answers depending on who I'm talking to. You know, I hear deep concerns about, for instance, racism in collection development when I am talking to librarians of color on Twitter that I do not hear from my white colleagues. And I feel like there's questions about reflecting the concerns of your diverse colleagues and patrons, and asking the kinds of questions that a wide variety of people would ask about what should be in the curriculum. I think we could do a better job incorporating more voices into just framing the questions that need to be answered, and thinking about, you know, who are we unconsciously excluding in the stories we tell in library school. But we can't cover everything we want to cover, you know.
No.
Perspectives make more sense to me than content in terms of answering this question, because you cannot shove that much content into 2 years.
No. No, I will say, every time I'm asked a question similar to this, it usually comes from someone being disappointed. Let's be polite. I'm going to use Ben's kind of couch terms now. Disappointed in their experience in library school, perhaps. Whereas my experience in library school was very different than that. You know, I had the opportunity to do my education at UNC Chapel Hill, and the thing that I liked the best about it was that you could do one class every semester that was not a part of the library school, right? You could take a class in the journalism school, or in the business school, or in the law school even. The copyright course for librarians was the law school class. It was actually the one with the lawyers in it, right? It was not a dumbed down version of copyright. So I would love to see. Library schools take that kind of broad view, where it wasn't optional to take classes from other places. Maybe it's mandatory to take classes from other places, and you have to have this broader experience. One of the reasons that I went into librarianship to begin with was that I didn't want to specialize. I knew I wanted to be an academic, but I didn't want to be the world expert in the tiny snail that lives on the top of a mountain in Nepal. I wanted a broader view of the world, and librarianship was the place that I could do that. So our education should kind of reflect that, I think. We should get a broader kind of experience that we can apply to the world, whether that is, business classes, which I agree with, or leadership classes, which I agree with, or classes that encourage, just hearing the voices that are not currently in the profession. So that's great. And I would also like to point out, just for the audience, that 4 of us answered this question and not a single person said technology skills. So there you go. All right, so we're down to about 10 minutes left. Gosh, this flew very quick. So we're going to go to one more question. I think we'll probably have time for one more, depending upon how long people have for this one, or how long people talk for this one. I am going to say, so here's last question. What do you see as the biggest problem for public libraries to overcome in the next 10 years? What is the problem that you see we have to get past in the next 10 years? And then a follow-up, does the answer change if we say 50 years?
Sure, I'll take that on.
Go.
I am thinking of the guy at the very swanky party in the very expensive leather jacket who was very good-looking and said that, well, he just buys all of his books from Amazon and reads them on his Kindle, so he doesn't need libraries anymore. He does not represent everyone in the world, but he has really disproportionate effects on policy and funding. And, getting over that problem where people who are disproportionately influential in policy and funding are perhaps the least likely to use or to really need library services. Again, it's a problem of perspective. It's a problem of whose voices are at the table, and I think that's the big threat. How do you make sure people understand that worlds are bigger than that?
Yeah. You think that that both time frames, 10 years and 50 years, you think we'll still be struggling with that 50 years from now? Yeah, I do too. But thought I'd throw that out. It's a hard problem. It is a very, very hard problem. So.
It was simply unthinkable to him. I've tried to explain, not everyone has, $10 for every book they want to read, or a Kindle or whatever, and he's like, but everyone I know does.
Yeah.
I agree with that. I agree with Andromeda. I think that we have an awareness problem. I think for too long we just had an expectation that people, when they needed resources that libraries provided, they just went to the library. We were the only show in town, and I think that we continued down that path and struggled against the tide of changing times within our communities, technology specifically, and when I started talking about marketing libraries a few years back, I was actually, it was profanity, because people were talking about how, we shouldn't be wasting our money on advertising. And for me, again, going back to that business mindset, I just felt like, how do you plan on making people aware of what it is that you offer your community if you're not doing anything to promote yourself outside the walls of your building? We live in a time now that the world just moves too fast. There's just too much information and garbage thrown at people on a daily basis for us to assume that they're going to think about the library. And I think that what winds up happening once we start to promote ourselves is that we do reach people with things that are going to be valuable for them, but we're also telling the story to the rest of the community for things that might not be valuable to them personally, but are valuable to the community, and we help them see that value for the community. The guy that just buys a $10 book on his Kindle, if we promote ourselves appropriately within our community, he may still feel the same way for himself, but at least we've exposed ourselves for the value we've got for those people who aren't as privileged as he is to be able to do that. So I think an increased effort, and the tide is changing in this direction, but an increased effort in making the community more aware of who we are and what it is that we offer and why we have value and relevance over the course of the next 10 years, because we are definitely slow to move as an industry. I think that we're going to have significant strides in defining ourselves to our community. Then it becomes a matter of what are we defining ourselves as, and that goes into the other questions we were discussing. How that's going to wind up fleshing itself out over 50 years, it's just like any other industry. We have to be willing to continue to adapt to the times that we live in and be aware of them and look at how we are going to contribute to our communities as those times and as those accesses change.
Okay.
I can't decide if we're parroting each other or not at this point, but maybe we're on the right path since we're all kind of talking about the same thing, or I'm about to talk about the same thing. I think our single biggest problem is how we talk about ourselves, that we're not concise enough. We don't spend enough time talking about the why behind our what. We spend a lot of time talking about our stuff, our technology, our story times, our programs, but what we really need is a passionate advancement of our core values. Because when someone tries to argue with you about the value of democracy or egalitarian access to information or giving every child a chance, those people are jerks and they're not going to win. So our ability to turn a phrase and make sure we're, incredibly concise, to the point, and we're consistently advancing our core values. Let's not have the conversation in their frame. Let's frame it to what we need it to be. So to Ben's point, the story that advances your core value of how people have access to the information they need to have a better life is far more important than having the conversation of the why buy when you can borrow conversation. I think that when we speak to people's higher values, we have a broader appeal. When you take a look at the Q Internet and Research Center study, the new library patron from December 2013, right? It said 91% of Americans think libraries are important. So like, hell yeah, we're done, right? But like the subtitle there was that 30%, a full third of those people, don't quite know what we do. So while they think we're pretty awesome, we're probably good people doing good stuff, they don't really know what that is anymore, which was a big warning flag to me that we've really got a honeymoon period here to get our act together and start talking with one voice in a concise way about why libraries matter, why we are critical to our communities, and people can't live without us. And we've got to be that serious about delivering the message. It's not optional anymore, and it's not about a bulleted list of services that we have to offer. It's that higher calling that we have to be talking about very, very consistently.
Yeah, that return to the core values, that kind of focusing in on that democratic access to information, the freedom of reading and all of that, it lends itself, kind of blends over into one of the other questions that we're not going to get to because we don't have time, I don't think, to talk about it fully, but one of the ones that we didn't get to that I wanted to think about was how libraries use their voices in the battle between privacy and gathering data, and how we fall down on that issue. It was mentioned, Andromeda mentioned it earlier in one of the questions, but that was one I had hoped we would get to, and I don't think we're going to.
And I do have to say, I'm particularly interested in hearing the Measure the Future guy take that on at some point.
Yes, yeah, well, I have about 1,200 words of a blog post written on that very topic, actually, because obviously I do think that privacy of the reading experience is enormously important. It is among the values that libraries should hold most dear. So I think that's a good question, and I have answers for all of those. So in my quest to make the statistics of our libraries better and more interesting, I'm not willing to throw privacy under the bus for that. So, and for those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, I'm the director of a project called Measure the Future, which was a grant-funded project to do some in-building analytics, and you can Google Measure the Future if you're interested in what that is. I did want to take 1 minute and say that the flip of the question that we just asked, which was the biggest problem for public libraries to overcome. I wanted to ask that about academic libraries too. We talk a lot about publics. Publics are far more common. Public libraries are far more common than academic libraries in the U.S. But academic libraries are undergoing a series of crises as well, not the least of which is the collapse of the higher education system in the United States. The slow motion burning of our educational higher educational system, and public or academic libraries are going to be struggling with identity issues and funding issues and things like that over the next 10 years fairly heavily. It's something that worries me a great deal. I don't know if anybody wants to take a few seconds and say anything about academic libraries under that context, but if you do, now's the time. Or not.
I'm not in a position to speak about academic libraries.
Yeah.
It's not what I know.
Sure.
But I think that academic libraries are going to suffer from the corporatization of higher education, and the idea that higher education has become big business now, and it is more about dollars to institution than it is about educating people. There's going to be fallout and repercussion for the libraries that have to serve those people as well as a result of that, because it's a dollar and cents game now.
Yeah, that's exactly the slow motion. Again, what I call the slow motion burning is, the pulling back of all the public funds and the reliance on effectively ROI to make decisions about higher education is something that worries me a great deal about academic libraries moving forward over the next bunch of years. Well, it is 3 o'clock Eastern, 2 o'clock Central here in the lovely Central Time Zone where I am seated, and that is the end of our broadcast. Thank you guys very much. You got about 15-20 seconds each to say goodbye if you'd like, or to tell people where to find you. Andromeda, where can people find you online?
AndromedaYelton.com or that Andromeda on Twitter.
Excellent. Ben?
BenBizzle.com or @BenBizzle on Twitter.
Excellent. Rebecca?
I spend a lot of time on Facebook, so if you go to facebook.org, Sustainable Libraries on Facebook, or @Rebecca on Twitter. I also have a website, sustainablelibraries.org.
Awesome. And I am, again, Jason Griffey. You can find me at jasongriffey.net. I am @Griffey on Twitter, and various other places. If you look for Griffey in libraries, you'll probably find me. So thank you guys for joining us. This